Follow us on social media and please hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on any updates from our ALS experts.
All right, folks, welcome aboard one more time. I'm glad that everybody knows that this place is a place safe for you to come. It's a place of hope. And there's a little statement I'd like to share with you, and that is, hope is not passive. Hope is when you take the hammer and you break the glass on the alarm and you sound out to all who can hear you. We need help. Please come. Okay? That's hope. Hope is not passive. So my hope is with all of you. So thank you for being here. Lisa, it's all yours.
Thank you for that, McFinn. Welcome, everyone. Happy New Year. Thank you so much for joining us to kick off our 2022 ALS Talk Series. I am Lisa Deegan. I lost my younger brother, John, to ALS, and our team worked so hard to help accelerate treatments for ALS to honor our loved ones that we lost to this disease. And we want to make a difference for others that are affected today. I'd like to take a moment to thank everyone who helped us to make an impact in 2021. We could have not done this without the support from the ALS community, industry leaders, collaborators, which includes researchers, neurologists, technologists, and pharmaceutical companies, and our Everything ALS team, bringing it all together. So just a few highlights for 2021. We grew our community to over 4,000 members, thanks to our 14 team members now and 20 student ambassadors. Our focus really is bringing digital biomarkers to clinical trials. And this is exactly what our speech study is doing. And it actually grew to over 750 participants in 2021, resulting in over 1,000 hours of data that we have shared with scientists all over the world. And I also want to say thank you to the $1.3 million we received from donors. Finally, we want to thank you, our ALS Expert Talk speakers, and all the participants. Thanks to your support, our 25 talks had over 4,500 live participants, which generated over 100,000 views online of ALS expert content. So we're looking forward to more progress being done in 2022. We are recruiting for our Everything ALS speech study to reach 1,000 participants. We are also now recording for our second speech study. It's called Speaking Aloud, and it focuses on the potential for strengthening speech capabilities for people with ALS. We need your help. So please reach out to info@everythingals.org if you're interested. We are also looking forward to more ALS roundtables that were a success, and continuing our podcast, Stories and Innovation in ALS, sharing more stories of experts and those affected. So tonight, we're excited to bring you the experts on Act for ALS to address our community, to answer your questions. And as you all know, on December 22nd or 23rd, a huge step was taken for ALS when President Biden signed the Act for ALS into law. And that's thanks to all the tireless efforts from the advocates in our community. So tonight we're here to learn more about Act for ALS, specifically, how can we help people now that the bill's been passed, and where do we go from here? Legislators are organizing to assure early and full implementation, and they want to hear from the community, so please put your questions in the chat. I'm honored to introduce our presenters for tonight. We have Dr. Ryan Archer, Chief of Staff for Congressman Jeff Fortenberry, and Megan Miller, Director of Science and Policy from I Am ALS. And we also have joining us Dr. Cudkowicz, who we're all familiar with. She's been on our platform several times presenting. She's the Chief of Neurology for Mass General Hospital. She's going to address questions around treatments and the expanded access program. So I'm so glad she was able to make time to be here, and thank you all for making the time to be here with us tonight to address our community. So let's give a warm welcome to our presenters. Reyn, we are going to begin with you.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, first of all, this is a monumental journey that we took together. We started as actually a conversation with Mary Kay Turner, and my congressman said, I want to help my brother-in-law, Joe Gregory, who had ALS and had finished the Neuron trial, and he was declining significantly. And that was in the summer 2.5 years ago, a congressman said, find a way to get access to that drug, use right to try. I work with the FDA. We spent about 3 or 4 months from April to August and failed. And so I called the company and I said, we need to do something for Joe. And I was told we can't just do something for one. And I said, okay, let's help everybody. So we started on this journey to think about what it would take to change the paradigm. And then we wrote our first bill, which was called No More Placebos, back in December 2 years ago. And we, with the idea to start a conversation, and what that conversation did is led me to Brian Wallach and to IMALS, and we had basically a tremendous sense of possibility of working together, as McFinn said, hope, to do something different. And so out of that, we actually wrote the full first version of Act for ALS. And in the beginning, it was very difficult. We had very few supporters. We had very few members of Congress. We had a FDA and NIH not supportive. We had the Senate leadership and the House leadership not supportive. But little by little, step by step, many of you who have come to know, and many of you I know on my Facebook page, you all became the wings you became the wind under our wings to carry us step by step by step through this incredibly long and tedious journey. And along the way, and I think the reason I speak to the challenges we faced over and again, the leadership and others said to us, get rid of the expanded access program and we'll help you pass this bill. And I just really was so touched that IMALS and Mike Quigley's staff, Allison Jarris, who really partnered with me, we refused to give in to the pressures to remove the expanded access program. And it became an incredible journey of fortitude and discipline and commitment. And at the same time, each one of you were calling your members, and little by little by little, this became a stampede. And frankly, as Anna Eshoo said at the end, this became the most popular bill in all of Congress. And in the end, we had no idea the Senate would move so quickly, because we had heard that Senator Burr had some concerns, and we also had heard that Patty Murray had some concerns. And then all of a sudden, he said he's running this hotline, and the next thing we knew, that we had a Senate vote, and we were stunned, and that's how we ended this year, with such a bang. So Finn, we created hope. We broke the glass, as you said. We did it with everybody who is here, because I know many who did many different calls. Michelle Lawrence was incredibly potent and disciplined in terms of driving that. So immediately, as it looked like we were going to pass this bill, we've been in conversation with the leadership of the main members of the Congress and Senate who were involved in this, and we are in dialogue right now with the David Sturry, who works with Mike Quigley, and the team with both Senator Coons and Senator Murkowski, and we are pushing forward to try to streamline and accelerate the process by which this bill will actually take hold. What we know from Chairwoman DeLauro is that she was not in a position to put money towards this bill for the expanded access until the bill passed. But keep in mind, we don't even have our 2022 appropriations bill passed, and that's going into what's called a continuing resolution. And until that bill passes, we won't be funding the government except for with what we've been doing historically. In addition, it will take in theory, a year to fund Act for ALS through the standard process. But I believe that there's a way to do it differently. And that's the main message I want to bring today. And I think there are two things that matter. One of them is that, the data around neurone has improved tremendously. We've been getting new information. And also, I think that's changing things. And we've seen the FDA, who already filed an application or approved a previous expanded access application, and they approved a second application. And one of the things that we did on behalf of Joe is Gregory back just in April 20th, 2020 is when Joe died. And right before that, we learned that NIH was going to fund the completion of a crossover and expanded or open label extension for those who had been in the trial. And they had been committed and willing to put up $75 million. So we are going to go back to NIH and Dr. Koroshatz, and we're going to basically take him up on his previous offer to begin to do this as soon as possible. And there are going to be some demands and requirements that the clinical trial sites are going to have to be engaged. The company will have to be engaged. And we are committed as legislators and appropriators to get together to see what we can do to accelerate that process. So we're not waiting another year for expanded access. So we may well need your help along the way, and we know where to find you. So I'd love to answer any questions that people have. And I think there's another part of the bill that we also passed, which was I think it's important to keep in mind that 75% of the money was intended to go to expanded access, and 25% of the money was intended to go to FDA to create a research program, much like they have for Orphan Products Grants Program. This was what ALS Association had brought forward as an idea, and we included that in a second version of the bill. And we have partially funded that in the 2022 of $5 million. So we're going to push FDA to start looking at this rare neurodegenerative diseases grants program, which will be another research arm. The other piece that's important is because of Joe and because Joe lost his life to ALS, Francis Collins agreed to put $25 million into a special a new fund for research at NIH to look at things like infectious diseases, immunology, toxicology, engineering, biomarkers, so that we're going to try to reshape the paradigm for research in ALS as well. So we're very pleased about that fund, and it's also gotten itself up and running. So again, our vision is, and our commitment within our legislative group is to retain that proportionality of expanded access versus research. And our commitment is to identify and work with our leadership to find a way for NIH to fund that in this year. So we hope that within the next 3 to 6 months, we'll have real progress on that.
Thank you so much. Now, does that conclude your presentation, Dr. Archer?
If you call it a presentation, it's more just a great joy to be with everybody, and the incredible feeling you have when you've been on this journey, and you can, now we have to make it work. It can't just be passing a piece of legislation. We have to be active in making sure the agencies know what to do, and to do it well, and to do it fast.
And that's why we thank you for being here, because that's the plan of this webinar, to know what it is that needs to be done now moving forward. And hopefully the community can get their questions addressed, and we can walk away with a plan, knowing what to do. So thank you so much. Megan, if you're ready to present now.
So thank you, Lisa, for inviting me today. I thought to start with an introduction. I'm about 6 months into this work with the ALS community. My name is Megan Miller. As Lisa said, I'm the Director of Science and Policy for I Am ALS. My background is in neuroscience. So I have a PhD in molecular neuroscience and spent about the first 10 years of my career doing academic research before making the move to science policy, where I worked for the government, running grant programs for a number of years before finding I Am ALS and meeting with Danielle Carnival, who was the former CEO, and really just kind of fell in love with the mission and the advocates and the cause. And so I'm really proud to be a part of this community now. So Sarah, if you could go to the next slide, please. So I thought I'd start, Reyn gave a really awesome overview of the history of ALS and how it came to be. That was before I was part of this cause anyway, so I'm really glad that he kicked us off. But just a few numbers to kind of highlight the magnitude or the success of this endeavor. So I know that there were a number of introductions and reintroductions, but it was in the end 7 months from the time that the bill was introduced to when it was passed, the final version of the bill. There were 331 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives and 63 in the U.S. Senate. We know that this was the most, as Reyn said earlier, most popular bill in the Congress in the U.S. this year's Congress. And I think that one of our consultants did some digging and found that this is actually in the top handful of most popular bills in recorded history. I think that really just speaks to the importance of this piece of legislation and the incredible advocacy work that has propelled it as quickly as it got through. And then
I would just say one thing, Megan. It doesn't feel quick. It felt long for almost April will be 3 years. So 7 months is the last battle campaign.
Yes, I know. Everyone feels like it felt long, but everyone that I speak to on the Hill these days mentions how rapidly in Congress speak it happened, particularly this final introduction of the bill. We know that nothing is fast enough for the ALS clock, but it is, I think, unprecedented how the community was able to get such really universal support for this piece of legislation. And then the mystery number is the number of calls, emails, Zoom meetings, etc., that this community had with members of Congress. We tried an exercise with our legislative community team earlier, or I guess at the end of last year, to try to even estimate how much time or effort was spent doing that, and it's just truly impossible. I mean, even for one or two truly super active members of the community, it's just an astounding number, an astounding amount of effort. Next slide, please, sir. So I thought I'd say a little bit about, from my perspective, what I think was kind of like the special sauce. How did it happen? How are we so successful? And the first is of course very strong champions on the Hill. We just heard from Reyn how long he and his team and Representative Fortenberry have been championing this. We also have huge champions in Representative Quigley and Senators Coons and Murkowski, the entire ALS caucus, which is now hundreds of members. We have extremely strong champions on the Hill, and that is due to the fact that ALS affects everyone and that people really feel connected to it and also feel drawn to try to improve the lives of people living with ALS. The second is smart, consistent collaboration with key stakeholders. So of course, there are all of the Hill champions and others, but also other ALS advocacy organizations and other organizations who may not do advocacy work per se, but who still were able to participate in this and support it and feel some sense of ownership over it. Also stakeholders like NIH and FDA had input kind of all along as this was, as it was being built and revised. And I think that that has helped it to be a really strong piece of legislation that, that we hope will be implemented quickly and robustly as a result. And then lastly, of course, and most importantly, the unprecedented grassroots advocacy from you all. We hear time and time again just how impressive it is, how many people showed up every day, knocking on doors, hitting the pavement, making sure that no one in the halls of Congress, everybody in the halls of Congress knew about Act for ALS. Everyone knew what ALS was and the importance of expanded access, or the importance of getting therapies through the pipeline. And on the next slide, I have actually a couple of quotes that I pulled from recent conversations with people. The first one is from Dan Tate, who is the founding partner of Forbes Tate. We work really closely with him. He is a mentor and has been working in Washington for decades. He also happens to be living with ALS. He wrote in an email to some of the ALS advocates that this is the best advocacy group I've ever seen. The group has flipped the script extraordinary. Senator Lisa Murkowski, in one of the celebration Zoom meetings we had after Act for ALS passed the Senate, said, "You guys are a powerhouse." And then another one of our legislative consultants, Mike Marola, has repeatedly said, we have broken the space-time continuum to get this done. So again, just really speaking to the incredible grassroots effort that this was. Okay, so what's next? As far as implementation goes, Reyn kind of touched on this. There are several different parts of the legislation. Of course, we all know about the expanded access program. This is, from our perspective and from, I think, a lot of the community's perspective, really the heart and soul of the bill. This will be implemented by NIH, presumably by the NINDS. It will require some coordination with the FDA because they will have to file their paperwork to provide expanded access. It will provide funding for EAP research projects. The research part of it is sort of a critical and unique element to it. So it isn't just access, but it's also research on expanded access and research on how a therapy might work in, for instance, a population that is more progressed in disease. Eligibility will be limited to clinical trial sites who are running phase 3 trials that are sponsored by small businesses. So that's kind of a lot of words, but really what it means is, like, if you're running a clinical trial and the drug sponsor is a small business, you could be eligible to apply for a grant under the Expanded Access Grant Program. Again, that would be through NIH, and NIH presumably will put out what we often call a request for applications, or a notice of funding opportunity that will notify the community when there is money available to like submit an application. If you could click once, Sarah, I think there's an animation there. Okay, so this, as I said, is really a unique and really a first of its kind program, which is designed to both ensure widespread access to investigational treatments for ALS and also to better understand ALS progression by collecting data from a larger pool of people living with ALS. As we know, most clinical trials are restricted to people within the first couple of years of symptom onset. So this would also give an opportunity for us to learn something more about the later stages of the disease. Okay, so then the next, there are a couple of other elements of the legislation. One is a public-private partnership. This will be a collaboration between NIH and FDA and a private sector entity or entities, likely academic institutions who are involved in research. The legislation indicates that it needs to be established within 1 calendar year of enactment. So that was December 23rd when it was signed into law. And then the other pieces are an ALS Action Plan and a research grant program, which will be run by the FDA. So the action plan is due within 6 months. And the focus of this research grant program would likely be on clinical trials or translational research. So as far as next steps on our end, the fiscal year 2022 budget has not yet been approved. So as Reyn was mentioning, typically these things don't get funded until the following fiscal year because of the way that the appropriations process works. Although since we are currently under a continuing resolution for the fiscal year 2022 budget, we have a somewhat unique opportunity to get funding set aside specifically for Act for ALS this year instead of waiting until the 2023 appropriations process. So we are working really closely with Reyn and Representative Fortenberry and other champions, as well as the appropriators, to ensure that Act for ALS is not only on the radar, but is prioritized as part of the process this year. We feel pretty optimistic about this. I don't know if we're going to get all 100 million appropriated this year, but we have a really huge champion in Representative DeLauro, who is the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee in the House. And also the vast majority of appropriators, both in the House and in the Senate, were co-sponsors of Act for ALS. So we have a lot of support from the people who are making the funding decisions in the US government. Excuse me. And then in addition to that, the 2023 appropriations process, even though 2022 process is just finishing up, the 2023 process will start really soon right after that. So we also have our eyes on 2023 appropriations to make sure that Act for ALS can be fully funded, at least by then. As far as implementation, we are also working and fully committed to ensuring that the entire bill is robustly and holistically implemented, and in as timely a manner as we can. So we are, as you all know, the bill was just signed into law, a couple weeks ago. So we don't have a lot to report yet on this work, but we are beginning stakeholder engagement. Certainly NIH and FDA are at the top of the list. We're also talking to people who run clinical trials and the drug sponsors, other advocacy organizations, et cetera, to make sure that and of course, people living with and impacted by ALS, to make sure that we are considering the needs of all the stakeholders and can help FDA and NIH stand up the most effective and robust programs that they can. Okay, so since I know that this is a very action-oriented bunch, I wanted to make sure that we had plenty of time to talk about what it is that you can do to help move this along. So I think there are two big things right now, and as Reyn said, we certainly will let you know as other things come up. The first is to continue the incredible outreach that you've been doing to members of Congress. Continue saying thank you to them. What's been really remarkable about this community is that they're very sort of like kind and respectful, and I think a thank you goes a long way in the halls of Congress. So please keep doing that. Tell your members of Congress and their staff what this piece of legislation means to you. Why is it that you're so happy to have seen it, progress into law? What is it that you're hoping to see from it when it's implemented? And then I think also we can maybe sort of subtly remind members that we hope that we can count on their support for the appropriations process. Those of them that are on the appropriations committees. And then the second thing that I think you can do is reach out to small biopharmaceutical companies with an ALS pipeline. So it's important that the small biopharma companies know that this piece of legislation was passed and they know what it's about. It's also really important that they know the value of an expanded access program for people living with ALS, and also for the research value that it offers to the ALS research community, in that it offers a chance to learn something about the disease beyond the first couple years of onset. And then, of course, on our website, I linked here, imals.org/action is where we have all of our our take action things. So as new things come up, if we need letters sent to members of Congress or or whatever it might be, it will be on this website. And then certainly we also have a super incredible and active legislative affairs community team. They meet on Wednesdays at 4 p.m. Eastern. We talk to them there are a number of the members that are on this call right now. We talk to them every week, and they are a great source of information as well. So feel free to join those calls.
That was incredible, Megan. I just wanted to add a couple things, if it's okay with you, because
yeah, absolutely. Sorry about the voice, everyone. I don't know.
Well, I'm having the same issue. I know Merritt is on and is going to add some more. I think one of the things that I really am excited about with Merritt and Bob Brown and others is that we started talking to them about this idea of expanded access, and I think it was in a sense new to them, in the sense of the larger possibility. And what was exciting to me is to see how potent and important the voices of these researchers became, because they came down to Washington, and Merritt did. She testified on July the 29th, and her testimony was so important for the folks on the committee to understand how to see this implemented without causing unintended consequences. And so it's remarkable how important these researchers are, not just for the research and taking care of patients, but also for helping shape the future policy of things. The other thing I want to do is, I forgot to thank one group that was incredibly important, which was No More Excuses, who was incredibly active in the very beginning in supporting this. And many of you all were part of No More Excuses and I Am ALS, and they worked really well together. Along the way, ALS Association came along, and after we included the part that they wanted to see included, they also came along and supported. So we really captured the fullness of all the stakeholders, including the Muscular Dystrophy Association, which also was an early adopter and supporter. So the fact that we could bring all these groups and many, many other small groups, who, including Everything ALS and many others, Stevens Nation was very active in the early days. So I just want to make sure that we don't just think it's not just the individuals, but many of the groups who became aggregated into this success. The other thing that I think is important is that, and I hope Merritt will speak to this, as we begin to go through this process of expanded access, I think many people that we heard along the way want to have access to Neurone. And along the journey, we saw folks who had been able to get access to Right to Try get better, but because they missed their endpoints, it was difficult to get FDA to approve the drug. But then subsequent to the work, and I hope Merritt will speak to that, the data has been emerging as very potent, particularly for a subgroup of patients. And so this opportunity is great within expanded access, but it's even greater if this drug moves into a process of approval. So I think these are parts of the conversation that we also need to consider.
Merritt, would you like to address the community? We're so glad you joined us. Thank you so
Hi,
much.
everybody. I have to confess that I had a call with Indu earlier this week about all the amazing digital biomarkers and how we could get that in the platform trial. And I told her I was joining this call to find out how I could apply with Niels for the money. And then she asked if I could say something, which I'm happy to do. But first, I just want to say how amazing this is. I've been in this field 20 years, and this is, besides finding, the Amylyx drug that was positive, this is one of the most amazing things to see a community, legislators, bipartisan, all the foundations and the pharma come together to make such an important bill. And also to change the language about EAP. I mean, when Dr. Archer and I, we first talked a long time ago, you're right, we didn't know much about this, even though it's very well known in oncology. And, we started to offer EAPs at Mass General Hospital, single patient, intermediate ones, like so for maybe 10 people or 30 people. And when we would talk to other of our colleagues, they'd say they didn't think it was a good idea. That's all changed now. Like every site, all the doctors want to do it. The advocates, the people, they let us know about it and want to do it. And now we have funding. It's been, I know 3 years sounds like a long time. I guess it is a long time, but it's still been a revolution. And so I'm very excited. I just want to say a little thing about EAPs. It sounds like this funding is going to be for drugs that are in phase 3 so that they, that we have some data that they're efficacious and we know the dose and we know some safety, but you can still do EAPs earlier than that. It just might be that this might not be the source of funding for it. So any physician, any one of your doctors could ask the company if they would provide the drug for an EAP for a single person or a couple people, even if the drug is in like phase 2 testing. Now, in the past, the companies would always say no, because they'd say they didn't want the risk and they didn't have the money to make the drug. But that's also changed because it's quite clear that the risk is very low to them. And now there's opportunities for applying for some money. And many of these small companies have met with the trial group from ALS, and they've heard that this is important. So they're starting to plan it. So I just want to say that I'm just amazed at the transition. I'm very excited about it. One of the things that Congress that they really thought was important was to make sure that nothing we do here slows down clinical trials or slows down the development of new drugs. And I am convinced that you can do that. You can do both. You can have your trials and you can have the EAPs for people who are not eligible, and you can learn from both. And hopefully these funds will make that really feasible. I'll say that the Northeast ALS Consortium with Jinsey Andrews' leadership has been talking about doing a kind of a platform trial approach for EAPs and see if we can, now that there's going to be some funding, streamline it even further so that it's just fast. Once there is a phase 3 trial, fast to launch the companion EAP. So hopefully that will all happen in parallel. I can answer maybe the neurone question if it's that Dr. Archer just asked. I mean, obviously I'm not from Brainstorm, so I can't speak for them, but I know, the FDA can't make any decision about approval or not until the company files. So that, and I know everybody knows that on this call, but that is the important next step. Because you can say all you want about the FDA, but they can't weigh in until the company files something called a BLA. I know that's something they're discussing, but that has to be the next step for deciding whether, giving the FDA a chance to decide if they're going to approve or not. I know the company did say they've announced that they will, for the people that were in the phase 3 trial, they made an EAP available for some of them. They're going to try to continue that for those people and try to, hopefully they're talking about whether they can expand that. And so I think that hopefully this will be a mechanism for some funding. I saw some notes that you guys are working on that so that they might be able to apply. So maybe I'll stop there and see if people have any questions for any of us.
Thank you so much, Merritt. That was very helpful.
Perfect. Well, like Lisa said, thank you. And we'll just get right on started. I'm Sarah, I'm from Everything ALS. And with myself, along with Michelle Lorenz, who everyone on this call most likely knows, we will go through all the questions. We have a lot, so we'll see as far as we can get through. The first question Does the fact that the Act for ALS passed mean that physicians may be willing to write more prescriptions for medications that may not yet be approved by the FDA, i.e. sodium phenylbutyrate?
Yeah, so if I understand the question, so for the Amylyx drug, that is now under FDA review, as everyone knows, with the PDUFA date, which is the date that the answer has to come back, announced, I think, recently. The company is, so that is a trial that would meet, I think, the criteria here. They might not meet a small company. I don't know what small company definition is, but they certainly meet the criteria for being ripe for EAP because they have very positive data. And so they are planning an EAP. And I think they're planning a couple webinars soon. I know Sabrina Paganoni's on the call too, to tell the community about when that will happen. And that would be for people not eligible for the current phase 3 trial for Amylyx. Sure.
Thank you.
And Reyn, I think this one's going to be directed towards you. I know you answered it briefly, but if you can just highlight on it. Must the participating sites be participating in a phase 3 trial to be eligible for the EAP funds?
Well, as I understand it, we in the beginning intended for the trial sites to be the places where the EAP would begin. I think that there are going to be things that we're going to understand as we go along that we will need to reconsider. And we may be able to change some of those things by rule, and we may want to do it through another piece of legislation. But part of being able to pass this legislation was to keep this process very tight in the sense of making sure that it was in the hands of the physicians who understood the drug and making sure that the company that worked with those physicians was a partner so that when they went to the FDA, that there was no sort of just an expansion of this just purely because somebody wants access. Because there's part of the requirements in doing this and leaving it with the NIH. Some folks wanted us to put it at HRSA, which would have meant just passing money out. And we felt like that moving this outside of a research paradigm would actually lose a lot of the information we would get from those who may not have been able to be part of a trial or be part of or be excluded in a trial today. And we might never know what benefit someone might get if they were at an FRS score of 20 or 15. And so we didn't want to be stuck in a very narrow paradigm. And that was a lot of negotiation, discussion around that. And this is where we had to land to get the bill passed.
And I know, Reyn, when we did the calls with Congress, that was really critical for a lot of them who had the objections about there being no research. And we cited to Merritt's testimony, right, in the hearing where she said EAPs will support research. And the fact that this was going to be at phase 3 clinical trial sites with people like Merritt and Bob Brown and Tony Windebank, Congress trusted that they were going to be able to collect that data to support further research. So that was a big part of it in getting people on board. Sarah?
Yeah, the next question is, we talked about the allocation meeting having to come up for 2022. What, in terms of timeline after that, would this money potentially be distributed? So kind of what is that process after the allocation meeting occurs?
I don't think I fully understand the question, but I would just say that our goal is that in the beginning, there's $100 million. That number can evolve and grow in Congress. And the proportionality can shift in Congress through their own directions, through the appropriations process. But our goal is for the short term to put $75 million into EAP and $25 million into the other parts of the program, which is the rare diseases, orphan or rare neurodegenerative disease products program, and the partnership that for the first time will require that there's an opportunity for NIH, FDA, trial sites, patients, companies to all have one conversation. Right now at HHS, in Congress, we can't have a conversation both with NIH and FDA in the same meeting. We can't have a conversation with NIH if we have patients there. So everything is going to shift in the sense of the nature of the conversation because of this bill as well. So these are really important pieces to help set in motion future opportunities to continue to evolve the way we think about both research, approval, and access to drugs.
Thank you.
Merritt, I think the next one will be for you. When you get an EAP set up, how do you decide how you're going to distribute those to PALs? Because obviously now we're going to have a lot more money available. So how, as a clinician, do you make that determination about who gets into EAP?
Yeah, so the number one thing is that it has to be people not eligible for trials. That's an FDA and also part of this act for ALS, and really it helps the whole community if we make sure we design it in a way that allows us to do trials and get more effective drugs to people. So that's the number one. And then after that, a lot of physicians and also the FDA sometimes ask for this in the protocol. It has to be someone you're following in your center. So that's important. That's why it's really important to have all the centers and the doctors excited about EAP and being part of this, so that people don't have to travel far for it. And then, we've really been doing it by first come, first serve. We have 157 people in EAP at the Healy Center right now. And I'd love for that to grow. But it's been kind of first come, first serve, but it's after we know that someone's not eligible for a trial.
Wonderful. I think this question also kind of pertains to you, Merritt. Nathan's staff has previously talked about the synergistic effects of drugs. We've also heard you on the Everything ALS call talk about that too. Would people be able to be eligible for more than one EAP or be on more than one drug in a program?
Yeah, there's no rule on it. So I'll say that, and this is a discussion with the company and the FDA and the safety of the two drugs. So there are some companies that they're willing to do the EAP, but they don't want someone to be another EAP because it might make it confusing if there's a side effect. But there are other companies that have not had that restriction. So I think it really depends on the safety of the drug and the drug-drug interactions.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Can I just add one comment here? Because as a physician, one of the things that we have as a regulatory framework is that we tend to do one drug at a time. And then you end up with some drugs like Advair, which was a steroid and a bronchial dilator. The fact is if we could accelerate and see whether there's synergistic effects between drugs in ways to test hypotheses and do that quicker than we can do that today, I think that's going to be very helpful to managing symptoms, managing progression and other things. So I hope that we can frame that out in a way that is both scientifically sound and can satisfy the regulatory bodies, and also even get NIH to understand the role of funding science around that idea of combination therapies.
I agree completely on combination therapies. In a way, the Amylyx is a combination therapy itself, and then it was given, people could take riluzole and edaravone, so it was like almost four drugs in one. But we have to keep doing that, keep adding, so we get big effects.
That actually leads right into the next question, Merritt. So some people have said they're excluded from participating in trials because of the medications they're taking, or some are excluded, for example, if they have prior cancers that they haven't taken the time to pass. How will that be impacting EAP? Will some people still be excluded from EAP because of their medications?
Again, I don't think there's a blanket rule on there. I think that if there's no safety reason for that, in EAPs, again, you're not looking at efficacy. So it's not a clinical trial that's needed for approval. There can be looser rules on it. The reason in trials that sometimes people are excluded for off-label drugs or taking things that are in other trials is because it makes it impossible to tell if the drug works or not. And the goal of the trial is to find out if the drug works or not.
Let me add, I think that's really important. And that's the whole point of EAP, is because people who have exclusion criteria for trials need a place to go, and this is a means to do that. But we're also going to learn whether FDA or NIH put up roadblocks to certain of these things for other reasons, and we may have to, because there are no rules yet. These rules are going to be developed, and all of us have to be committed to making sure that the rules don't become stupid rules, let's just say. And we have this guidance from September 2019 that the FDA said that they were going to change the regulatory path. They got lambasted on the hearing on the 29th for not doing anything about those rules. So we have to be really clear that we want to make smart decisions about rules that are scientifically sound and humane. And we're going to have to continue as a group to stay engaged in that process.
I agree totally. We have some EAPs, I'll just say, that have no exclusion criteria. I mean, you have to have ALS, that's it. And so we have people on ventilators on our EAPs, and people are taking, all sorts of other things. So I do think that I agree with you. We need to be at the table on when this is set up so that we don't get boxed in.
Yeah, I'll just add to that, putting on my former government funder hat. A lot of these decisions will be made, as Reyn was saying, kind of at the NIH, because companies or CROs who want access to the funds will put in an application, and then NIH will decide yes or no. And part of that application undoubtedly will be the inclusion exclusion criteria, to the extent that there are any for an expanded access program. So yeah, just echoing, I guess, what you all are already saying, that I think we have to be at the table early, before the money starts going out, to make sure that the program is what we intended it to be.
Absolutely. Sarah, I think this mine. Sorry. So the next question is, will the VA hospitals have access to treatments under EAP, or will veterans have to go elsewhere where there's phase 3 trial sites?
Don't know yet.
They shouldn't. There's nothing that excludes VA from doing EAPs, but it sounds like they have to be part of the phase 3 trial.
That's correct. For now.
I think that's an important question, just because of how much work and assistance the Veterans Affairs and that population helped with getting this bill passed. So that's huge. Our next question talks about how to distribute this information. Where will patients and people with ALS go to gain information about the EAPs that are available?
That's a great question. I think we're going to have to work on some sort of public mechanism, and frankly, that might also be part of rulemaking, that there has to be some public announcement as a part of this. So that's a great question, and one that we ought to put in the mix.
Yeah, right now it's not required to post them on clinicaltrial.gov. So for every other trial, you do have to post it before you enroll a single person on this public website, but not for EAPs. We've actually tried to post to them there, and they're not set up for it. So that might be an opportunity.
That's great to know, Merritt. Thank you.
Is there?
I can jump in here. Also, we have so I'm ALS, the clinical trials community team put together ALS Signal, which is a clinical trials dashboard, and it does include expanded access programs. So we certainly would make sure that they're there. So that's one place. I also wanted to add that in the bill that got signed into law, there was an additional provision requiring applicants to indicate how they were going to ensure equitable access of the drug to people, like communities that are underrepresented. So that will be part of the application process, and that will be part of the evaluation process. So I would expect that a competitive application would propose a way to ensure that the community has knowledge of the program.
Wonderful.
And I think that'll be really great if we can do that as they apply, not just after they're done, because we want to be able to support those manufacturers that are applying as well. The next question, Merritt's probably again to you. So is there a washout period to participate in EAP if you were in other trials like Healy, the Toferson trial, Neuron, or Amylyx?
I feel like I'm saying the same thing. There's no rules on it. I have some EAPs where the company did want to wash out, and other ones where they didn't care.
Can you explain to them what a washout is? They may not know.
So a washout is a time to get the current drug you're on out of your system. And that's usually what we call 5 times the half-life of the drug. So if the drug, let's say, is a twice-a-day drug, it usually has a half-life of 8 hours. So 40 hours later, that drug will be out of your system. So that's usually what's important for a washout if you're worried about a drug-drug interaction. So I personally don't think we need very long washouts for EAPs, only if there's a safety risk issue with a particular drug.
Because this is meant to be a research program, my guess is that there probably would be a requirement, but I defer to, because then you at least have like the pre-post control, but yeah, I defer to Merritt on what that looks like, obviously.
Our next question looks at the difference between small molecule EAP processes versus something maybe like Tregs or like a biologic. Do you think that there will be any differences in that structure because of the differences in cost?
I think they're likely to be different in size because of not just the cost, but also just the mechanics of doing something like a stem cell based treatment like Tregs or neuron versus a small molecule, which you can have a lot of supply for.
And there also is going to be a lot of discussion around, pricing for whatever the drug companies get and setting a fair market value for direct costs. But the big part of this too is it pays for clinical care as a part of the EAP. And I think, and also one of the things that was required in this that's important is that the clinical care is not going to get indirect costs. So all these major universities that do research add what's called indirect cost fee, sometimes 70, 75, 80% of the cost of the research. And so what that means is the money will go farther for clinical care, but the research part will get indirect costs in the same way that research already gets that. So that was a nuance that was in the bill to try to make the dollars go farther.
And the next one, I jump in because you already talked about the biologics merit. So who decides what will be funded, what patients are selected, and for how long? Not only the appropriations questions that were addressed, but the logistical questions. Who's going to make those decisions?
I defer to Dr. Archer about the funding decisions.
Well, the funding, I think there's one other nuance in funding, and Megan spoke to it. There's a public-private partnership which allows private money to actually match U.S. government money. So the point is that it really comes down to how much money we have to spend. If we have $75 million a year, there's going to have to go through a process of selection. And, this fund could be massive. And the goal is not to treat everybody through EAP. It's to treat people in a time phase in which we're going from phase 2 to 3 to approval. And I also think that the pressure, if there's a lot of pressure on EAP, it's going to put pressure on the FDA to accelerate approval, because at some level they're intertwined with this demand. And what we start learning from EAP is going to allow us to help in a sort of a halo communications way to understand that now we're basically treating patients, they're not placebo, and we're going to understand a lot faster the effect of the drug. And I think that may create an approval process that accelerates as well. And so we hoped that this would all be synergistic to itself, and therefore there will be some who will be selected, as Merritt said, on a first come first served basis. And if we get to a place where we can't take care of everybody, there are going to be limitations, for example, on these cell-based therapies and just the ability to make them. There won't be enough mechanism to produce them. So, it might end up having to go to some lottery. I don't know at this point. I think we need to explore that. We need to bring medical ethicists into this, and we need to bring the community into this so that we make good choices for who gets chosen first.
I want to build on your point about that going to approval. That's the end goal, right? I mean, that you don't want EAPs for like 5 years with a drug, right? You want it for that intermediate time when you know that it has a positive effect and it's going to FDA review for approval. a bit again, like what the AMLEX group is planning right now.
Absolutely. This next question kind of talks about the other 25 million part of it. Can we discuss a little bit about where that money would be going, what it would be doing, and what ways patients can maybe get involved in helping to push that money to be utilized?
So that money, ALS Association has the deepest knowledge about the Orphan Products Grants Program. This is a research program within FDA. Part of the money will go to that. Part of it will go to this partnership that we first we had a center of excellence, then we had a collaborative center, and now we have a partnership. But that partnership needs to be funded, and so we'll be working with FDA in the definitions, and we'll be working with external stakeholders on what that needs to look like. But I think that's less clear to all of us right now than the EAP is.
And it looks like we just have time for one more question. And before I go to that question, I just want to acknowledge one other person that jumped on the call. So Congresswoman Eshu's legislative assistant, Eric, has joined the call with us today. And for those of us that were at the hearing and listened to all of those, we know that Dr. Archer and people like Congressman Fortenberry and Quigley, they've been champions for us in this community. We wouldn't be where we are without them talking to the people on the floor and getting things passed. But I also really want to acknowledge Anna Eshu, because she fought to help us get that hearing on July 29th. She stood up at that hearing and said to the FDA, you need to help out. She had the quotes of the year with saying things at the vote like, does anybody dare vote no? And she really was a champion on pushing this for a vote in both the Health Subcommittee and the full Energy and Commerce Committee. She worked in partnership with Reyn and with David and Allison over at Congressman Quigley's office. So for Anna Eshu and Eric, if you can let her know that this community loves her. She's the most quoted person in Congress in our community, and we're so grateful for her for that. And she also happens to be Indu, the founder of Everything ALS, Indu and Lisa's own congresswoman, as well as our own beloved Jamie Berry. So thank you, Congresswoman Eshu, for that. And then I think we'll close with the last question. We had a lot of questions about the tofersen EAP because we have several people who are still trying to get access to it. And so my question, Merritt, is if you can give us some insight on where that is. We know Biogen's not covering the IRB cost and the treatment cost. And so there's several people, hundreds of people who are SOD1 who still don't have access to the tofersen EAP. Can you help us out with any insight on that?
Sure, and this might be an area where we need to do some advocacy. I think there's lack of clarity about whether a company can pay the sites for an EAP for a non-marketed drug, and whether, or if that's undue coercion of some sort. So there are companies now that are willing to give the drug for EAP but not fund it. And for a pill, that most sites can handle the cost for giving someone a oral drug. But for something like tofersen, where it's injections, usually at a clinical site, it's actually there are some costs around it. So there are some sites that would like to do it for their patients, but just can't. And again, that would be a nice way to use these funds. But I think any doctor that is doing this for people with SOD1, but this is a case where they would take people who are not their patients, because once you've started to do it for a few people, then it's not so much more to do it. And I'd be happy if anyone wants to call us. We are giving that, and we have a SOD1 philanthropy fund we're using. I think it's really important to offer that to people.
Unfortunately, the Biogen funds won't meet the definition of small biopharma, so the Act for ALS won't help with them. But
we have to sort out whether it's true that companies really can't cover those costs. That seems to be coming up a fair amount.
Yeah, Mary, I think we've been in ongoing conversations both with your group about what it actually takes to get an EAP up and running, and also with Biogen to better understand where the legal sort of boundaries versus like what was a bottom line kind of company decision, and I frankly don't have clarity on that either, but we are still advocating. So for those of you on the call who if Michelle, you mentioned that there are a few people who have not been able to get access to it. Please reach out to me. I'd love to hear your story and better understand, the obstacles that you or your clinicians are experiencing, so that we can try to figure out how we as an advocacy organization and advocacy, community can reduce the barriers.
Megan, can you drop your email in there for people?
Yep, absolutely.
And on that note, all the links and emails and information that has been placed in the chat, I've been saving. We make sure that everyone gets access to this recording so that people can rewatch it and relearn and understand better. So those links will also be included in that under the video on YouTube. So you will have all of these information and all this access later on at another date. So I want to personally say thank you to our presenters from all of us at Everything ALS and everyone in this community. We cannot thank you more for all the work that you've put in to make Act for ALS happen. This was so big and just amazing to watch and amazing to see. So thank you, thank you, thank you. For those of you who are in our community, you know that this is the time where we get to spend hearing from you. We let you unmute yourselves. You're allowed to talk, but we don't want to be disrespectful to our presenters' time. So Dr. Archer, Megan, Dr. Cudkowicz, sorry, Dr. Merritt Cudkowicz, and Michelle, thank you again for coming and joining us. And we hope to see you again soon.